say more than I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what I have. I'm just made of what I see going around. Okay. Been there 104 years.
Go around doing a little round of introductions.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just share that. I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves in a second. I've had COVID exposure, that's why I'm wearing a mask. If you have trouble hearing me, please let me know, and I'll try to speak more loudly and clearly. I know it's an inconvenience. I'm driving me crazy. My glasses keep dying. We'll see how it goes. So, I'm Andy Watts. I'm chair of the Essex Town Selectboard.
I'm Greg Duggan. I'm the town manager for Essex.
John Lang Farm.
I'm Dewey Norton. I'm on the zoning board of Essex.
Ken Signorello, I'm on the Conservation and Trails Committee.
Dan there?
Oh, I'm Tammy Getchell. I'm the one that spilled the water. I'm the assistant to the manager, and I'm going to try to get this on YouTube for you today.
My name's Trevor Williams, TREFOR.
Nancy and Betsy Dunn.
Kelsey. Okay, thanks everyone for coming.
Conservation and Trails, I'm sorry. Conservation and Trails.
The topic that we wanted to talk about today is the select board road plan. We're tracking it out there, but we can certainly go off on any topic anybody would like to discuss. So should I go through the list of what's on here and then open up
Could you just
discussion?
give us a chance just to read the list?
Sure. Yeah. We did have reviewed it in a couple meetings.
I looked at it online. Good stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot. So just some background, and maybe you can pay attention to two things at once. If not, I'm just going to talk, and you can ask questions later. But so the select board, our fiscal year is coming to an end June 30th, and so looking ahead to the new budget cycle coming up, the select board put together its work plan of what it wants to accomplish in the coming year. Departments all do that as well from municipal staff, so that's maybe you do what you're talking about online, so you can take a look online and sort of see what each department wants to accomplish in the coming year, what the select board wants to accomplish, and roughly what each of the volunteer boards and committees are looking to accomplish in the coming year as well. So the select board spent some time putting this together in May. It was approved in May, and as the current fiscal year wraps up, we're looking ahead to what we can do as a municipal organization and the town and the select board, what it wants to accomplish.
So how do you want to proceed? You want me to go through the list, cover some highlights? Do you want to take time to read it? I'm happy to go through and get some highlights.
Is the new property or land on here anywhere? I don't see it.
It's the fourth one down.
Thank you.
Yep, municipal complex.
Thank you.
Hi, there's some next here. I haven't gotten beverages for. Would anyone like beverages?
I'll have a coffee.
I'll have coffee.
Yeah.
So,
Might be some
I have
extra
a
mugs
question
down
about the
there.
departmental strategy plans.
Yep.
So, I mentioned this at one of the select boards that where they had a plan to look at Burn Hollow and stormwater, and that's when they also had that conversation about the speed bumps on Deli. So that was like 3 years ago when that conversation took place. Maybe 2, but I'm pretty sure it was 3 years ago. And since then, the stormwater has been coming, and the storms we've had lately, even more. And the problem with it is that they haven't done that stormwater mitigation.
Thank you.
And they have been shooting out of those pipes into the trails in Fern Hollow. We're getting more erosion than we've had before. A lot more trees have come down, and on City Lane, some of the houses are losing more of their backyards because of trees coming down. And I'm hoping, when I talked to Aaron, he said, well, we know it's there, and we pick and choose what we want to do next. And I think this is a big next. And I'd like to see a little fire there, because, a little fire there, because this is this is a treasure in the town, the Matthew Forest. The trails are lovely, people like them a lot, they use them all the time. And we're
Exactly,
gonna.
it's Matthew for.
So when you come up on Sand Hill and you go to the park and up by the back of the tennis courts are, you can enter the Matthew Forest there. And the Matthew Forest comes all the way over to Tanglewood. And it's about 2.5 miles from when you enter over by the tennis courts to Tanglewood side. And then you have a little bit more that goes down off of the other side of Tanglewood and goes
I'm
down.
just asking
over
because there's a big
Prairie
chunk
Fields.
of land my parents gave, I had a long time ago, at the end of Tanglewood,
Yes,
so that's probably part of it.
exactly right, exactly right.
So right opposite Price Chopper, you went up there.
Yeah,
Beyond.
Yeah, and
You get turned around so quick out of there.
well, and, you know, it would be nice to be able to map it, but we've got one section that there is, off of Tanglewood behind 57 Tanglewood that we didn't put in their deed, the back easement, they put in the left side of the property. But, we just need to get that taken care of, because I don't want to lose that, and the state has identified that whole area as important geological features, because there's stuff there that isn't anywhere else in the state. So I think we should really think about moving on that storyline.
Comment on that, or I know wasn't there was a preferred option selected by the select board, or is this the project I'm thinking about, or?
I believe so. I can, I think Betsy, you're right to reach out to Aaron Martin, our Public Works Director, as far as exactly where it stands and what they're gonna be doing in the near future. There's a few things I'm hearing that kind of tie in. Is the stormwater is a big part of it. We have a Director of Water Quality, Andy Costandi, who's in charge of stormwater. She's been doing a lot of work around the town as far as stormwater projects. Public Works kind of tackles them in a few ways. We've had some impaired waterways, Indian Brook, Sunderland Brook. There's a lot of regulations either in place and coming from the state and feds about water quality and stormwater, how to treat it, and there's everything from sediment levels to phosphorus levels to other chemical compounds. So a lot of times Public Works kind of tackles them as in order of where they can get state and federal money to help with the projects, because they cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to do some of this stuff. And also where it's going to make the biggest impact. So that's kind of where they're tackling things. As far as where exactly Burn Hollow sits and some of the Tanglewood stuff, that's a question for Aaron, and I can reach out to him and try to follow up. And also mentioning Matthew Town Forest and the trails back there, that kind of figures into another project which I believe is on this list for the select board. It was on the list last year too. Second from the bottom, it talks about trail network. So getting a grasp on our trail network. We've had some conversations. Conservation and Trails Committee is part of that. We've had some turnover in staffing. The former planner, Darren Schindler, was doing a lot of work in that. Parks and Rec is involved. They've had some staffing shortages as of late, turnover. So it's on the radar. We're kind of chipping away at it. One of the ideas that's come up in the past is to sort of get a grasp on where our trails are, what kind of condition they're in. We have a pretty good sense of where the trails are. I know when Darren was here, he's been gone for 6, 7, 8 months at this point. But he was going to work with the Conservation and Trails Committee about doing kind of an assessment or condition of the trail. So that's part of, I think, what fits into here. So to me, it's kind of those two pieces, stormwater and parks, kind of coming together in that area that you're talking about.
So one of the things that I think is a way of dealing with this, because I know Ally is burdened. She's got not enough staff and she's got a lot on her plate to do. And I think that let the Conservation and Trails Committee do the job. Let us advocate for the loop of what we're doing. But let us take over it, because we have the will and the might. That's what I'd like to see.
I have a couple of related questions. Would you rather go through your highlights, or since you're on the topic, or should I ask them now?
I'd say we're on the topic.
Go for it.
I had a couple of questions related to trails. I live in the Pinewood development, and there has been discussion about how somewhere it exists an underpass under And when I think about the reason that I'm here is because I'm raising a young family here. I grew up here with your kids, and I chose to move back here to raise my family here. And I care a lot about the strategic development of Essex, that it becomes someplace that I and other families want to continue raising our kids. And trail accessibility is a big component of that, especially given the traffic that we're now experiencing in places like the Route 15 corridor. And I think that while I recognize trails does not tend to be a highest priority topic in strategic planning, I think given that there is limited things that Town of Essex can do to alleviate the traffic problem, increasing the accessibility of trails could really benefit the overall well-being of families. For example, it of course intersects with school district stuff and busing, and in Pinewood, we have so many families who are having to go a very indirect way to our Essex schools. If we did in fact have access through that underpass connecting to Matthew or to the backside of EMS, we could have walkers and bikers to school. In terms of as the crow flies, it's such a very small amount of distance, but right now there's no access. And I believe that talking to relatives who grew up in the area, grew up in Pinewood, had family members, once upon a time they did do that. And so that did, Mr. Lane, you know
I
that
rolled in with all my friends that are motocross bikes.
Yeah, so you know that
I've done
that's
that too.
possible and it exists, and I
Oh,
just
yeah.
didn't know if that was something even on the radar to be explored, and I know that, you know, there's can be no guarantees, and it would be costly and logistically challenging, but I think that in terms of overall having huge wins for quality of life in Essex, that could be huge.
It is absolutely on the radar. I'm going to give you some background and get to that point. So we, the stormwater, there's a lot of, we have to do it. Federal requirements, state requirements, we have to do it. Similarly, we're going through a town plan update process right now. It's something that we have to do every 8 years. Now's the time to do that. So our community development department has been going through the town plan process. They've had a lot of public meetings, public information sessions, public feedback. They've got feedback from Conservation and Trails Committee, other boards and committees. One of the things that they've heard a lot about is connectivity. And people really want that connectivity. I mentioned Darren Shibler was a former planner who's moved on to, I wouldn't say bigger and better things, but good stuff for him. He's at the Regional Planning Commission now. The planner we hired to fill in the replace Darren is Ken Johnson, is his name. He's a transportation planner by trade. He's been here for 6 or 7 months now. He's starting to look at it and during the conversations about people who want connectivity, he's starting to think about how do you make that happen? Where does that happen?
Make a comment, but I'm a lifer in this community. I've been through this stuff in the 80s, the 90s.
I grew up with many
speak
of your
exactly
families.
to that subject matter, that part of connectivity. The Woodlands was supposed to connect to money. Oh my God, you think there'd be an eruption or something, NIMBY. Okay, the new development in the former coal board property was scheduled to connect to Fairview Farm. Oh my God, again, the world's falling. It's all about NIMBY. These people don't want it. Once they pay their $500,000, $700,000 for their home, they want to be exclusive. They don't want to have people coming to the table. So how do you speak to that? You connect with bike trails, but even
I think that bike trails could make a big difference though, because right now, the way that Pinewood currently, with that last section that is not developed, there is a trail that is gonna eventually be developed. But right now, there is still accessibility trails back there going up to the city. And of course, we know there's accessibility on the other side as well. So it's very bike trail.
So I just want to finish up my thought to answer your question about the cert. So Kent has been looking at this and he's starting to put together and reach out to the Regional Planning Commission about once the town plan is done. So you have to do that, and you have to do that first. Once the town plan is done, how do we do kind of more of a network analysis, connectivity analysis? He's looking at the cert because that is one big barrier between the two different parts of town, especially when you start talking about access to schools, from Pinewood to the middle school founders, to the center of town. So he's looking at it. It is absolutely on the radar. It's probably going to be a year or two before we get deep into how do we cross the cert, what are some of those other connections, but that's why the whole history of this stuff that we have to do some of that stuff so we can be ready and jump into the next piece when it's
Can I ask you a common question? You made a reference to a tunnel in Newton Circle. I have been a part of that my whole life, and the only tunnel I'm aware of is not in the area that you're describing.
It's not right there, but
No, no, it's way on the other side of
and
Route
it's also,
15.
it's also, kind of narrow for walking.
Yeah, snowmobile.
But one of the things I had learned that the select board and also in my conservation trails is, looking backwards at what happened with South Burlington when they made the bridge to connect to Burlington, the ARPA money that they had. I was suggesting that from the Pinewood area to just below where the Prairie Fields is, where you walk up the trails to the Prairie Fields, you could have a bridge for walking and bike riding, so that you connect the two sides of Essex. The kids don't have to be on the main roads, and they can come over and use the pool, and they can, and I think it really works for the whole piece. I really do.
Sounds like they're looking into that. I don't think we need to give them, solutions, maybe ideas, but it
Could
sounds
be at
like,
a 10 or 20 year.
yeah.
That's a big investment for a very limited amount
There's
of
federal money for
citizens.
it, but there's federal money for it.
That's good to know, because I had seen, this is obviously a living document you're working on, but I hadn't seen a lot of specifics about what trail connectivity. And I think that there's a few key strategic places where Essex is divided. Another one is along the lines of the golf course. There's no way to get around that section of the circ.
But the thing is, it won't be because there's no gain for us as property owners to allow a bike trail to go through there. It becomes a liability. From the family perspective, the section, every part of that place is there because my family's don't.
Have a good one, you
Don't.
guys.
Everybody else is, it's all get the access all the way down through the country on our land. I grew up there. We used to farm that field, but now it's down in the countryside. So these are a lot of things, I have long-term interest in these, and I see things from a more older view than many of the newer participants. My biggest thing is we need families back in this community. I'm not saying we don't have families, but it's not like it used to be.
That's why I'm here, to
Would you,
advocate on
would you,
behalf
but would you
of.
admit that it's not like it used to be? And my big push is we are building all this multi-story junk, as I call it. Yes, it's new. Yes, it brings in flavor to our community. It brings in a lot of people that are not here for jobs. They're not here for economic prospects. They're not here for any of that. You're different. You came from here. You came back, you're married, you want your kids here. I want the same thing. I want my kids raised here. And we have to be cautious of what we do to our school system. Take a look around Essex. I am not a racist. I am not a bigot. Don't ever. I am a real looker. I have a great deal of friends who are people of color, here and abroad. And we are bringing people that aren't from here. I know all the homeless people that live in their bicycles up here. I know 3 of them by name, and they know me. And we speak to them all the time when you see them. I know the ones that live down in Essex, 2 or 3 of those guys. These guys are homeless, okay? They don't have anywhere to live. They're not getting housed. We're not taking care of our own. We're creating situations where people are coming here for the advantages given with the broadness of the system. It's not, I don't want to see Essex Center turn into Essex Junction.
To get back to the topic of trails, one of the problems the Conservation and Trails Committee is having is a simple technical thing, mapping. We asked for access to the GIS coordinator and she was just scrapping, didn't have any time for us to get that mapping done. So if that can be freed up, just a little bit of time, where we can actually get all our trails in a layer in the GIS, properly labeled. We've actually got trails that we've discovered that we don't have the right of way anymore. We actually gave it up. The Lucier property, for example, has trails marked that go to Indian Brook, and they're on the Parks and Rec map. And yeah, we just discovered that we gave that easement up. And so we really need to get that updated and have all the trails properly labeled and in a GIS layer that we can then use and know what we have, where we need it, maybe other easements we can get or regain if necessary. That's something that is a very simple technical issue that if you resolve that would really help us a lot.
Has anyone looked into Rails to Trails Conservancy? There's a lot of old abandoned lines around.
I've already been used, and that's what against the Constitution.
Right.
Towers were all the way into Fairview.
Yes.
That's to
But
my
there's some
knowledge.
very old ones, I think, around, I don't know if they're
There's one
abandoned.
called the Old Stagecoach Trail. Okay, well, that's been long since built over. That went right between Pinewood and Fairview. I grew up on those trails. I heard all the history from my grandfather, all that stuff.
I was just going
I mean, the only one I'm aware of is the D&L, which is Burlington Memorial, which is currently serving as a bike path now. It might be explored to go further than it does.
I believe all of that land is all returned to adjacent property owners.
Yeah, it
That-
was,
that-
was
that-
it?
it
that
was
railroad-
ours. It was ours.
That railroad right of way was given up. You may still see some of the bed.
Yes, I see the,
Yeah,
I was
but it
just
You
wondering
may tell you a
about
story
that.
about that railroad, totally irrelevant. When my grandfather moved to his property in December of 1919, he was a senior at Cambridge High School. And he walked over every morning, jumped on the Burlington Memorial morning train up to attend school. The last 6 months of school, then took the train back every single day. He's every day he made it. But that was his story he would tell.
Yeah, it's the same that we lost the easements.
Oh, okay. That's, I was just wondering.
So as far as just to touch a little bit of the strategy that we're kind of coming at with the trails are, is we have just areas where you have public property. Indian Brook, there's the Unsworth property that's not connected, Indian Brook, we have the Matthew Town Forest, Saxon Hill, a few other little pockets here and there, Forestdale. So as the Conservation and Trails Committee is doing its analysis of the trail, we're kind of looking at it of where do we have trails? Let's get a good assessment of what's there, let's get them mapped. And then we can start to look at how do we connect those pieces, whether it's through easements, whether it's through other possibilities or some roads here and there, but kind of getting a good assessment of what's already there, what's public, and how do we bring them together.
A lot of that can be done through the planning commission and urging people who wish development to give a part or cede a part of it for that connection network.
You want to
That's
see it.
generally it's been done.
You want to see a nice, what I call a nice example of Jeffersonville. You go up to Jeffersonville, just beyond the rotary there's a parking area and where you get access to the rail trails. And so on. They have nice signage, they have maps, they show the integration of businesses in the
And
community.
that would tie right into this one if you
So
get the access.
it's been very nicely done. It looks like it was in conjunction with the Illinois County planning or whatever. So, but anyway, you want to see an example of what I think is a real good example of integrating trails within the community and businesses and so on. It's nicely done there.
There's a lot of work we want to do. We want the trails to be able to be on the website so people can see where the trails are. And I've done the mapping for us, that's why I realized how much of the erosion is worse there. But we can map it all out, we just have to have that one easement there and the one easement on the other side. where
Details,
house
those are
goes.
details, Betsy.
Yeah.
Details.
But
So
those
the
details hold up the
Oh,
whole
no,
thing.
I know what I'm saying. Excuse me, but can we move on? You
I
know,
hope
yeah, you know,
I'm
I think we've hit trails pretty good.
Municipal complex.
Sorry.
Fill me in on the municipal complex and where that's at.
Sure, yeah, there's 30 acres that we put in actually do the picture of it back here, over there. It's at the corner of Route 15 and Old Stage Road. There's a kind of a square lot there, and then there's one that goes pretty far back. There's 30 acres, there's 2 lots together, 30 acres.
Former Soul Law
In
and former
between
Roll
Old
Property.
Stage and the mobile station?
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice, perfect location.
There's one small segment in there that's owned by the house in there.
Yeah, I think it's the
Yes.
same owners who own the Maple Fields mobile station. I'm pretty sure are the ones who own that small little lot.
Lot house there, that's a nice house.
So we're correct me if I'm wrong here, we're working with a maybe you should tell the story.
So,
He's actually doing the work.
Yeah, so we have I'm not just me by any means. We have a purchase and sale agreement to acquire those 30 acres that Andy mentioned. We're planning to use our ARPA money, so that's our federal dollars from COVID relief to acquire that land. We have until mid-November to do our due diligence on the site. So we're doing title searches. We have an engineering firm that just this week was out there. They're going to be doing their site investigation, taking a look at it for natural resources constraints, transportation issues, challenges. how to-
Lighting and all
So it's
that.
laid out. We
yes.
won't get into lighting yet, that'll be down the road. Then we have a real estate advising company that we've contracted with as well, so who's gonna help us with it. We don't think we need the full 30 acres, but it was 30 acres or nothing. But that's an opportunity for the town down the
For
road.
future, yes.
Yeah, so we
Excellent.
can keep our piece and then
Yeah.
we can look at how do we help develop can I just finish up?
You need the library.
So we talk about how do we build that site out, what are some of the other options out there, is it, do we sell off to a private developer, is there a public-private partnership, what does the town want to see up on that property? Once we know, we're kind of working concurrently, but once we know we're gonna acquire the land, we can spend some more time talking about what's gonna go up there. The town offices right now are in a different municipality, so that's
Right.
one option. The fire station is getting old and small and outdated for the need, so that's an option. The library is constrained and tight.
Yes.
That might be
The
an option.
parking lot at the library is small.
Parking, there's been a need or desire, bordering on need for a community center, for recreation
Yes.
space, programming space. The senior center is gonna be no longer, we're still gonna be doing senior programming, but we don't have a dedicated space for seniors. So those are the types of things that we'll be looking at to put on the site. Obviously, it's gonna cost money, so we'll be looking at how do we pay for it, what timeline, in what order, those kind of things. We have a lot of public conversation, proposals about what some of the options might be along there.
We coordinated with Essex Westford about their ongoing facilities discussion. By 2038, they're having to discuss potentially completely changing their facilities makeup. They just did a community
And
session. where they announced
wastewater
this.
and all that,
And so
yes.
as a result, by 2038, they are potentially going to be dramatically re-envisioning, and that could potentially offer then Town of Essex several different sites that would be available for things like the senior center. Lori Houghton and Beth are.
Oh, that's coordinate with.
That's good to know. We
Yeah.
talked a little bit here and there with myself and the administrators at BWSD, but I have not spoken to them in a few months, and that's good to know.
Brian just presented it at their last community engagement session, but they have a full half-hour presentation.
I like that idea.
Okay, those two properties have been long under discussion by many people. There's that developer that bought both properties, I guess 20-some years ago in hopes that they'd be able to develop. Now they put it for sale. Would you be able to disclose the purchase and sale price of that property?
$3 million.
Wow. Only doable if you could spin some off for residential development.
Well, we have over $3 million from that federal ARPA funding, so that would cover the cost of the acquisition, but not for the cost of the building. So
The interesting point is there's a lot of discussion been for 30 years. What's in the sewer core, what's out of the sewer. And also, although we have seen some very limited development along Lost Nation Road and a couple other houses up there, there's no real development on that side of the road. My wonder and concern is where does the sewer go? Because it doesn't make sense gravity-wise down to the pump station that's located in the farm. It needs another pump station and driving it the other way down the fourth main that goes down Route 50, which doesn't seem to make sense, being that's up higher elevation-wise. But it also opens up the door to single-family development on the outside of the sewer core as it is now. So that means all of the Kewing's land, all of that land that goes up through the old Tebow farm and that huge stretch that's owned by Al Center, of which who knows what he's gonna do because his mansion's spot right in the middle of it. So it's just a lot of things. I support opening the sewer core. We don't have enough single-family development in this community. And single-family brings people like you represent, somebody with a family, what a school board means. You participate in your kids' stuff. You don't see that in the apartment community as much. I'm sure you do, but I am just anti what I've seen happen in apartments. I own apartments. I think apartments are a great thing, okay? But on that other token, don't bring all good. I want to see single family. Single families, you bring those solid people who have pride in their community that decorate their house for Christmas and Halloween, and they go to the sports games with families where it's at, and where I don't see it. Have you seen a lot of kids hanging out the apartments in Essex?
Can I ask though, my understanding is part of why single family is so hard right now is it's not cost effective to be built, given Vermont shortages in both material and labor. And so as a result, from what I understand, again, I'm not an expert, but if there's no financial incentive for developers to build anything but McMansions, you're going to dramatically limit the people in my income bracket and age set that are able to afford to live here.
And I can't reasonably argue that point. But what I could say to that is, we are looking at some of our areas in development and near the golf course, but what I'm pushing is for small lots, high density, single family homes. Has anybody been south on Route 7, going out of the city, right when you get to the Fiddlehead Beer and winery right there? Look hard to the left. There's a really cool little group of homes there. They're very small lots. The homes are very architecturally pleasing. They're not these big McMansions. I don't want McMansions. That doesn't bring anything. I've been that route all my life and working on these things. What brings it is just homes that people can afford. And even the homes on the former coal board property, they started at over $500,000, which is absurd for considering how large they are. What do we do to fight that? I don't know.
I think there's, for single families, not just speaks solely for all young families
No,
ever, but
no.
seeing as I think I have probably a couple of years on the rest of you, I'm probably the only one with young children right now. I think cost of living is a big one, I think childcare is a big one, and I want you to really get to your highlights, but I would like to ask a little bit about any kind of strategic visioning around what EJRP is going to be looking like now that things have slowed. And I also think that there's discussion, I think a big thing talking to other parents is connectivity, because people move to this district for Essex and everything Essex has to offer with parks and Essex School District, but right now our traffic situation is a real barrier and our housing situation is a real barrier.
They're highways.
So EJRP is completely a city thing, and we are not involved with that at all.
So there's no plans or expansion in terms of how they administer Essex-based programs at the after school?
None in this, in my town.
Different communities.
That's a
Well,
school
but they
district.
still,
That's
they
just
still
parks.
administer those.
Yeah, I would know with no kids.
So that's a contract between the school district and EJRP. It's not, the town's not involved with that.
So, but there's no plans for Essex Rec to develop something similar for Town of Essex?
Well, we had the Y coming over to and having a children's after-school program. And that was for a long one. And I think that went away in 18 or 19.
Yeah, I know that's administered without your involvement, but I do think that Essex families could benefit from an advocate about how that program is administered, because the way it is right now, they prioritize families who are able to get into after school. And with the idea that they must have the most need, but then as a result for their summer program, including the Town of Essex ones housed at EEF and at Founders, the way that they did it is they counted all the credits for kids at after school. So I will out myself, we got shafted and waitlisted for after school. And then as a result, we did not get into any of the rec summer programming, which is a huge financial burden for my family. And I know there's others. The idea is that, of course, they're prioritizing families with need, but frankly, there's a lot of families who don't need it whatsoever, who are in a substantially higher income bracket who are making up slots in that program. And because we are town residents, every time there is advocacy with the junction about it, we're kind of told, well, your counties go to your own select board. So that was another thing I wanted to bring up is I recognize this is not something you have a hand in, but because it does impact Essex residents, we could maybe use some support and advocacy around that.
Go ahead.
I don't know how we got onto the school district housing thing. We were on the municipal complex. Two quick questions. Number one, it's 30 acres, am I right? The two parcels got up to about 30 acres. All right, so the long skinny one and the squarish one, right? Okay. The second thing is, how did that meeting go that you had, Greg, the other day with staff and was that person from the company that's helping with the analysis 2 days ago?
When we were at the site?
Yeah.
It was initial kind
It
of
was
walkthrough.
Catherine and Maren and you and some other person I couldn't recognize.
Yeah, you have to be driving by.
Somebody sent me a picture.
Yeah, it was, we were looking at the site, it was our first
I
walkthrough
know.
with the engineer, yeah.
So
So
what's the word?
there's not, I'm trying to answer, there's not a whole lot to say. It was an initial walkthrough, they kind of took a look at the site, they're gonna be doing more work, but it was our chance to meet the engineers on the site and have an initial conversation.
So that guy with this, with the, was one of the engineers.
Yes.
Cool.
What firm do you use?
PHP.
Out of state?
They're multi-state, but they do have their kind of self-purchased office.
I work-
Office is one of the-
I worked for them when they were just VA
They're local,
I'm listening.
in Boston.
Who is it? Who is the firm again?
VHB.
VHB stands for?
Vanessa Hang and Rustler.
We put out, quotes.
Yeah,
It wasn't a bid situation, we got quotes. They came in below what the bid requirement is for our purchasing policy.
they were originally
We
traffic
had,
engineers.
we think we had 2 responses and we went through, a team who did the selection.
That answers my question, we only get 2 responses.
We thought they were best qualified to do the services.
I have one more question. The low narrow piece, it just almost gets into the circ right of way, that corner. Are you guys thinking about contacting V-Trans to see if there'd be a possibility of like a fire emergency entrance onto the circ?
We haven't thought too much about the circ and access that way, it's not a
It seems like
bad
a
thought.
pretty
depending on-
interesting opportunity, kind of like what they did up at UVM, you know, they have a special entrance to the hospital.
But I think our first step right now is to make sure the site is developed.
Yeah.
And we access it.
I just
Those
saw
are kind
that
of
and I
our
said,
first
oh,
priorities.
this is an opportunity for an emergency.
Have a comment. That plan is traditionally gonna have sewer works, we don't know. What is gonna happen to the balance of the land for its inclusion in the sewer code? Because that position will be hard to defend once you develop, the town or the town offices go there, and everybody else is gonna try and develop.
So most of that land is in the sewer corridor, it's that back portion, that long, narrow rectangle that approaches the circ, that part's out of the sewer corridor. The part that we might be primarily probably looking at the municipal complex that's within the sewer corridor.
You know,
So that answers your question.
well, kind of, because all through the years, you know, the team will cross the Aspen probably all the way up through. And then in the sewer corridor, but Route 15 was the dividing line.
Yeah, see, the map,
Except
the map,
for Heritage Estates.
I've been here for 10 years and it's been fixed long before I've been here.
I gotta look at it again, but I'm not sure what that exact line was, but across from me is definitely out of sewer.
On the, where the mini golf course is? Yes, that's not in the sewer corridor.
Any other questions, any other topics?
How about, high priority item, the DRB
Yes.
is, very, very important. I'm not sure how the select board is gonna get involved in that, other than the planning commission, I guess. I mean, I was pretty disappointed to hear that the planning commission has no specific plans for how to transition to the DRB. I was kind of stunned, actually.
Can you tell us what the DRB is?
The DRB is called Development Review Board. And currently our structure is we have a planning commission, which creates land use regulations and gives approvals for developments. The zoning board does small scale approvals. Both those would be dissolved in their current form and replaced with a planning commission, which only would do planning, and a DRB, which would do all the approvals. A separation of who makes the rules and who executes the rules. So that's where we're going. It was a charter change that we passed. The legislature hasn't passed it yet. Hopefully next session they will. And at a recent interview, I heard that the planning commission doesn't seem to have a plan for how to transition to the DRB. I was kind of surprised about that.
So that plan should come from staff.
It's gonna be a combination, I would think, of staff, the planning commission, the zoning board, and the select board. I'd say, in their defense, this was something that got passed in March. I mentioned earlier that they have to do a town plan update, they're doing zoning regulation updates. They have other stuff that they have to do, they weren't gonna drop everything to come up with a DRB transition plan. I think it's on here because assuming the legislature passes the charter change, approves the charter change, there's a deadline in there of January 1st, 2025, so we're about a year and a half away. I think the select board wants to make sure it happens, staff is gonna make sure it happens, the planning commission and zoning board are gonna make sure it happens. I think they haven't necessarily got into it yet because the charter change happened so fast. It was brought up in December, it was presented in December, there wasn't really any input from planning commission and DRB at that point. It was approved in March, so it wasn't as if they've had lots of time to build up and be ready for it and plan for it. It's kind of they were handed, you gotta do this. So I think it's coming, but I'm not surprised if they don't have a plan in place yet. That's gonna be what's happening in the next year.
Well, it's a high priority on, for the select board, so that's good.
Just as a member of the zoning board, I would, not gonna tell the planning commission and or community development how to go about this, but I'm a real believer in not being real. And a lot of communities around have gone through this process, and I would think that there would be good resources there to say, okay, how did you go about this? Try to get best practices, that kind of thing. So I don't think it's a huge task. It's a matter of laying it out so that you do make a transition that is seamless or less pain.
Yeah, and part of it's gonna be how does staff support that? The staff we have right now is gonna be, they're gonna either have different roles, we're gonna need more people, or some combination thereof.
Well, I think that, you know, the city has gotten itself a DRB, and that happened fairly quickly.
The structure happened quickly.
Yeah.
The staffing has not,
Yeah.
the people who are filling it don't have experience, from what
Right,
I've heard.
right.
So they're going through.
But the big thing for me is I'm excited that we have someone who's looking at short-term and long-term planning,
Yes.
not just the development, but looking at where do we want Essex to go, and where do we want it to look like?
And the planning commission does do that now.
Yes.
So,
Such a wonderful-
well, we mentioned the city, so I'll ask this. What is the current status? I believe there are several MOAs, is that the right term, memorandum agreements that existed between the town and the village as the whole stuff, whatever went on. What is the general status of those MOAs, and or how many are there that are still hanging fire out there in transition? I know there's the whole town clerk thing and so on. Could you kind of give us my impression is that there's still quite a bit to do here as far as undoing, if you will, or separating. Yeah,
That's a great idea.
yeah. I just like to understand, what is currently still hanging fire and what the schedule of the progress might be.
So we're still in a year where the city is paying taxes to the town still. So, the next tax bill will be the first tax bill that we all get without the city. So that's where the 22% potential increase there, right? So, the police agreement is a 10-year agreement. The town is providing contract services to the city for their police report. So that's a 10-year thing with there's a 3-year review cycle for is the costing model appropriate? We need to start looking at that within 2 years and finish it within 3. So that's a work activity that we have to do. You mentioned the town clerk, that ends June 30th. The sheriff town clerk ends June 30th. So July 1, we will promote our deputy clerk to our clerk. And our current clerk will then only be the clerk for the city.
So she's going to go back to the city.
Yeah.
So that will be a break there. All of the records that are in our vault stay in our vault because they've been town records. They will continue to be town records. So, and I don't know if there are. I think there's a separate set of books in there that belong to the city. I don't know from whether they physically move, whether they stay there. I don't know.
As of July, it was July 1st, 2022, which is when the city got its charter. That's when they started collecting city records. 95% sure those records will go to the city. Everything prior to that was for the town.
Right. So title searches will require searching at the city's vault and then coming over to ours. We will still collect all those fees for all those searches. So we'll still get revenue from those.
So land transactions going forward, the city will have their own land records and so on.
As of July 1st
As of July 1st.
last year,
Okay.
they started collecting them in a separate set of books.
Right.
Blue books instead of green books or something like that. They're differentiated.
Well, I see that, so the town offices are collecting them separately, is that what you're saying, or the city?
The current clerk's office is shared, and so
Yes.
somebody comes in, and if
Oh,
they
okay.
have a town
Yeah.
transfer, town transaction, it goes into the town. If
Yeah.
it's a city transaction, it goes into the city. So the shared clerk's office right now is separated from us.
Is that, okay, all right, all right.
Who gets related to the town clerk, Jim?
Oh, Jenny's in the Biscuit. Yeah, she's been here for years. Yeah, that's fine. Cheryl Brown has been our deputy secretary.
How about IT? How about IT? Did that get resolved? I know there were some issues with IT.
So,
Information
my understanding that IT is resolved. There's some complications with regard to assessing because we have a shared assessing services. Whatever criteria triggers a reassessment has happened, and so there's going to be a reassessment of Essex Town properties and Essex Junction City properties that will be done by our assessment, or our assessing department. The city will pay a per parcel fee for that. There's also, there's the reassessment fund that's been accumulating over the
I
years.
think that's gonna cover most of it. If it goes above that cost, then we'll share the cost on a per parcel basis.
So the IT is complicated by the fact that the assessing office needs to continue to assess the grand list information for both communities.
So except for assessing, it'll pretty much be independent as of July 1st.
IT? Yes, yeah, they're putting the finishing touches on right now, but the city is ramping up their IT system, and our IT department, the town's IT department, as well as doing both, is helping them that transition. We expect it to be done.
There is a clause in the IT agreement that says that if there are any license fees that transition beyond July 1st, that they will be paid 50/50 by each municipality. We're actually, you had said that, Greg had said this morning, we talked about this, that he thinks that all of those have been resolved, but we're going to verify and make sure there's no license fees on any software, any
Yeah, all the
fiber
365
optic
licenses,
lines
I get it.
or whatever, so.
Some of them may even be prepaid, I totally understand.
So finance and public works, those things are all.
So finance is not yet separated. That was a couple years.
I think it was up to 5 years.
5 years. They have moved out of our offices, so they're no longer out there. You can separate those out. There's, the city is working on, they don't yet have the ability to write their own checks. And so we are continuing to write checks for them. And I don't know whether that will be resolved by July 1st. And there is a clause in the agreement that says that the finance directors will agree on how to share costs, if there are any shared costs. If they don't agree, that goes to the managers. If they don't agree, that goes to the boards. We're not hoping not to have to nickel and dime.
So there's a bunch of stuff in the works. I guess are there any big hangups that you see that are going to be showstoppers, not showstoppers, but any that are problematic?
Tree farm.
Well, let's finish the shared services.
Yeah.
That's a whole separate thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things, right, we still are doing.
There's not a shared service agreement, so let's.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a whole separate thing.
So to answer your question, no, I don't think there's any showstoppers. There's a few things out there assessing. We're gonna share through the reappraisal, but everything's kind of more or less going along as expected. No surprises at this point.
And part of the police agreement, we've also established a community advisory board.
See that.
We're working through staffing and getting volunteers for that. Should they have the, statement from the commission.
And not the police commissioner for that, okay.
There'll be 3 representatives from the town and 3 representatives from the city. The city council will appoint their own representatives, so that when that gets to the middle of that, again, they don't have oversight capabilities.
Did I hear that right? It's 3 and 3?
Yes.
Did I hear that right? It's 3 representatives and 3 representatives? Oh, how unique.
The only other one is, I can look up this, recreation, senior services, Indian Brook, so that'll run through the end of this year.
Calendar year.
Calendar year, yes. So city residents will have access to Indian Brook at resident rates. Senior center will still be at 2 Lincoln Street. The town is providing staffing for the senior center and senior services, senior bus. All that's gonna end on December 31st of this year.
The city's already starting to move into some of the space at the senior center. It's down to one room now.
Would this be a good segue into revenue, future revenue?
Let's, I want to just kind of try to get in order. So there was a question about the tree farm, but maybe we can do revenue next.
When you say tree farm, do you mean trees raised to be?
It's just the name of the recreation.
Once upon a time, yes, but not a soccer field. And across
We
the
do,
field.
we do have a thought about that as well.
Ken, did you have a specific question about?
Well, I know that there's a short-term agreement in place right now for having the tree farm management group continue. What's the plan? It's gonna expire soon. What's the current drifting or leaning preferences? I'm kind of curious.
Go ahead.
So yeah, we have a lease agreement and a management agreement with the tree farm management group. They've been managing
2 more years, I think, something like that?
2.5 years. They've been managing it for the past 20, I don't know,
23.
20 some odd years. It's shared municipal ownership. The municipal boundary line, it's about a 100-acre parcel. The boundary line runs almost down the middle of it, but it's not as if the town has one side and the city has one side. It is, it's called tenants in common, so we each have 50%.
Is that correct? I thought that the town owned the tree farm.
We paid for it, but they didn't.
It's a
No, it's joint
shared
joint
ownership.
tenants.
It is.
We both own all of it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Keep it that way.
okay.
So we did a 3-year lease extension with the tree farm management group. That was signed in January of this year, so it runs for 2.5 more years. As part of that, the tree farm management group is providing documentation, better documentation about their finances, their nonprofit status, their assets, stuff like that. The town and the city are going to be working together to propose to the select board of trustees what would shared municipal oversight look like. And then we're gonna be able to look at that, and the two boards can sort of decide the future of the tree farm, and who's gonna be managing it, what's it gonna look like.
Am I correct in that the buildings are strictly town responsibility?
The white buildings that are on the town board.
Right,
so
there's 3
yeah,
buildings.
Small structures, storage sheds and stuff like that, that are kind of shared stuff, but yeah.
So the way the agreement is written, the town can bear responsibility for all financial responsibility for the buildings, in spite of the fact that we only own them. So we don't own them outright. It's still shared ownership, but the town
And
has.
responsibilities. Okay, I get it.
And we can't do anything to them until they fall down.
We get in trouble if they fall down. The state-
Anybody want coffee?
The state really wants us to take them down. There was one,
I'm
the
somebody.
seat building did fall down, which was a problem because there's asbestos in it.
Can I get a fork?
Everybody's doing work right now.
Any other agreements that are hanging out?
It's the public works, I don't think they think that they're.
I can't think of any other.
So
The city still has a first right of refusal at B1 Main.
There's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and out of curiosity, anybody have a ballpark idea, like plus or minus a few $100,000? What is 81 Main Street worth?
1.5 million?
That's about, I said 1.6.
So you had a question about revenue?
Revenue. Was- I assume that part of that is going to be reassessment of property. And I was wondering what other ideas from the people.
So we're going through a reappraisal process. It's not really trying to maximize or generate new revenue. It's more we're required by the state to do it. The background there. So there's this thing called the common level of appraisal, which every year the assessing office has to file the grand list. And then the state takes a look at it and gives us a number for a common level of appraisal. 100 is basically the assessed value of all the property in town is matching the market and selling it what the market would expect it to be. If it gets above 115%, so if So if the market is selling for less than we have stuff assessed at, we have to do a reappraisal. If it gets below 85%, which means that the market is selling for a lot higher than we have stuff assessed at, we have to do a reappraisal. We're below that 85%. So we actually are starting to get the contract signed for the reappraisal. Andy mentioned that earlier. We have a set of funds set aside that we get every year to cover that. So we're starting that process within a couple of weeks. So it's not really a revenue stream so much as it's time to catch up with the market and update our values and get better data. I'll talk about revenue in a moment, but just sometimes people might think that the value of the home is going to go up, they're going to be paying way more in taxes. That's not really the case. Basically, our budget every year, we have to raise our budget amount. The tax rate is based on the value of your home, but the value of your home might go up or down with the reappraisal, probably going to go up, but that means your tax rate is going to go down. So you're going to set a tax rate that raises the amount of money we need for our budget. So the tax rate will be higher or lower, but it's still going to base the value of your home, it's still going to raise about that same amount of money. The one exception to that is the capital tax. That's a fixed amount, so that's 3 cents on the value of your home. So I'll make up numbers. If the value of your home is $250,000 right now, it's probably outdated. The last reappraisal was 2007. 3 cents on 250. It's going to raise less money than 3 cents on $500,000. So that's where your taxes might go up. Probably will go up a bit. But as far as funding the municipal operating budget every year, you're going to be paying about the same amount of money. A little bit up each year.
Put out that clarification.
We're trying to. I think we've already sent some of our newsletters information, but yeah, we're going to be trying to get that word out. I actually had a meeting with Kate Vandy at the Essex Reporter yesterday with the assessor. She's doing a story about it, so we explained. That was just good too. Is it still revenue?
It's tax.
Let me just try to let me just finish up and I'll come to you. So that's the reappraisal piece, revenue. The select board for the past year has really been looking at how do we maximize revenue, how do we save costs. A few different ways. The budget this past year, we really took it down to the bone. So everything where we typically budget for overtime, not worst case scenario, but let's think we're going to have a bad winter. We're going to have bad this, bad that. We kind of took a historical look at the averages, and we're usually below the worst case scenario. So we took it down to what's our historic average. So if we get a bad winter, we have a lot of fires, something unexpected happens, we're going to be going over budget. So that's how we kind of kept the budget at
Like floods.
year 22. But yeah, so anything that don't cause over time. Revenue streams, we're starting to look at impact fees and updating some other impact fees. So our fire department is starting to do a study around that. That takes a look at what's your level of service, if there's new homes, new construction that gets built, so they pay an impact. So we're looking at updating some of those things to make sure we're keeping up with the costs. It's a revenue stream. But there's limited options, local options tax, higher taxes, grant opportunities we're looking at. As far as revenue, there's a limited number of tools. Do you have anything else to add?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention there is we set a budget and then the value of our house gets put against that. That's determined. We set a tax rate and the value of our house determines how much you pay. In a reassessment, your property relative to everyone else's can either go up or down or stay the same. So although Greg said you'd probably be paying about the same as you were before because although your assessment has gone up, the tax rate has gone up, but it depends on how your assessment varies relative to every other assessment in town. Back in 2007, when the last reassessment was done, my taxes went down. Because apparently I was overvalued relative to everybody else, and so things shifted in such a way that
You gonna rebate it?
but so it can go either way. So there's no guarantee that your taxes will stay the same.
What percentage of the budget is the
Property tax.
property tax, right?
Trying to remember that.
So think of the pie chart.
Our budget was what, 16 million?
roughly.
10 million of it is from taxes or 11
Sounds
million?
about right.
So 16 million budget, 10 or 11 million of it is from property taxes.
That's 2/3, I think, about right. 2/3.
Yeah, roughly.
So on the reassessment.
John has some questions.
Okay, one issue I've never gotten clarification in all these years of, we're gonna see our taxes go up because of the town, I mean, the city leaving, is municipal budget is the same, and not, our municipal isn't really, I mean, some, the school budget is what I'm concerned with. You know, when you pay taxes, we all know schools, 70% of the tax bill. Nothing theoretically changed in the school, they've always been separate. So that 22% increase is basically on municipal operating costs.
Only on
only.
municipal.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
So I told people, as we were getting into the budget and tax rates, if there's any consolation to a 22% tax rate increase projected, it's that it's on, it's on
Should be
25% of your tax, not the full. So it's, for most homeowners, we're probably talking a few $100s versus a couple $1,000. Still a lot of money, but not as bad as when you just hear 22% on the entire tax.
So one thing, anything else from that? There was one write-in question that we got from somebody that I want to make sure that I comment on. Someone asked the question about adopting development regulations similar to South Burlington's. And I just want to say that the Planning Commission is the place to bring those kind of comments, because the Planning Commission and the Community Development Department develop the regulations. There's a process for getting those getting the regulations updated. It's not a select board thing. The select board doesn't update them, although we're part of the process. I believe the Planning Commission has 2 public hearings.
I think the Planning Commission has one, and the Select Board has 2.
The Select Board has 2. And then it goes through Planning Commission approval with public input and a public hearing. Then the Select Board has 2 public hearings, and then the Select Board would then approve. And so just wanted to say thank you for the comment. Thank you for asking it. That everybody needs to go through the Planning Commission process.
When you said like South Burlington, exactly, what did you mean by that? Don't they have an escalation thing in there? Inflation?
It was a comment that came in that just suggested that we do in our PDI zoning district, adopt the standards that South Burlington has.
Oh,
Didn't get into the specifics.
Sure, yeah.
To add on to, I'll come to you in a second, but just to add on to what Andy was saying about zoning regulation changes, we do have some that are coming down the pipe. The Planning Commission approved some recently. It's going to be coming to the Select Board soon. It's not a wholesale change. It's not a comprehensive rewrite. They look at certain things and how much can they tackle at time. So if everybody's looking at it and thinking that, okay, we need to do this, that, or the other, that would probably be the next round of regulations.
The legislature just laid something on us too, right?
They always do.
Well, no, but I'm talking about
S100.
with their adjustment of increasing densities or lesser approvals in certain zoning areas.
Correct. We might catch up to that, but and I'm not by any means an expert, I haven't spent a ton of time on it yet, but if it's the law, it's the law.
Right.
Our rent will catch up, but it's still going to be in place.
So the thing about the regulations and zoning and whatnot right now is that the Planning Commission is working on the new town plan. And within that scope of that, they're adjusting regulations. So if there's something you think is important for them to consider, they are going to have meetings just like we had for Act 171 for the forests that we're required to have in the town plan. They're going to have different meetings like this throughout the town so that people can come and talk about it. And regulations can be shifted at that time, and they can adjust that into what they want to have for the town plan.
So any request for changes for zoning should really start with the town plan process.
Yeah, and so this is important because
Regulation development.
these next meetings, like the ones we had when we were at your place, did that, they'll be all around the town. And those who want to get people to go to, especially if they have thoughts about what they'd like to see for regulation changes.
So it's not the land use spot for concerns about traffic. the increased traffic of Route 15, traffic ability, all of that.
Good starting point.
And so to read the specific words that I got in the question, it says, I would like to see our zoning RPDI regs to include environmental standards like South Rome. What specifically that means, but I think, again, it's the town plan and the planning process is really where that question needs to go. Select board doesn't define regs.
I'd like to see the select board start doing a little bit of reassessment of some of the programs we put into place. For example, the $50 a head per meeting for committee members. I mean, that was put in place with an intent, largely to help people participate that might otherwise not be able to help work, pay for babysitting and that sort of thing. Now, I've been to a lot of meetings lately, and I'm still seeing a lot of people attending remotely with children in tow. I'm not sure that it's accomplishing the intent. So I would like to see some review, like how many people are getting it, how many people are attending in person, that kind of thing.
It's something we've talked about in staff of trying to do, and is it working? Is it accomplishing what we have set out to do?
I don't know.
My thought is we start with a survey, a basic survey to existing committee members and see. But it's one more thing to do. It's one more thing to fit in, so I don't know quite when we'll do it, but it's definitely on the radar and something we've talked about.
Anybody want to be in the zoning board? Because then we have a vacancy in the zoning board.
You've been there
Months.
forever.
For months, you know, so anybody wants to be in the zoning board, raise your hand. Get $50 a
Well,
meeting.
Actually, I applied to the planning board, but I do zoning too.
Oh. No,
There you go, put his name.
talk to
Take
Sharon.
that down.
Yeah.
That would be great, Trevor.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did the town end up keeping the Susie Wilson like complex over there by Lowe's and whatever? Is that town or is it just city?
Yeah, that's down.
I heard that there was some conflict.
There was a question early on, I don't know how serious it was about annexation.
I think the bigger thing is a lot of people were concerned about the local option tax because Lowe's was collecting it initially. And they are in the city.
Yeah.
They're in town.
This,
And
yeah,
so that was a big deal.
yeah, if you buy your checks from Checks Unlimited, they charge you the 7%. And I called them up on it and they said, sorry, there's nothing we can do. And I said, well, then I'm taking my business somewhere else. And I called the state called them. And I don't know.
It's sort of fraud.
Yeah.
Because
That was just a couple days ago that I discovered that. So it's still happening.
The state's very good about contacting. If you know, we get a receipt that says, and by the way, KP's good, I checked. Just contact the state tax department. They very much want to hear about individuals that are incorrectly collecting. They will contact them and they will get them straight.
Well, it's fraud.
Unfortunately, there's not much if you have a receipt, if you've paid the tax, if you have a receipt,
You can
get
send
a
it in.
refund from either you should be able to get a refund from the retailer. If not, you can get it from the state. Unfortunately, it's a
Process.
mail
Yeah.
form you have to send in.
It's a problem, and it's gonna be a problem if we get a local option tax, because then it's gonna be differentiating the two from the city and us.
It will always be a source of confusion.
Well, it's not a source of the confusion, it's a source of that, if the person is getting the local option tax taken out and it's going to the city is collecting that money inappropriately as well as the, as a entity, and that's fraud.
I wouldn't
That's
say,
not- it's not fraud.
no, I wouldn't say it's fraud.
It has to be
I don't
intentional.
think it's malicious intent from the city to take it over. I think it's more on the back end and the tracking. And we continue to have ongoing conversations with the state about reminding businesses, tracking, how can we inform residents to check.
Because it's the Senate that has to make a change to represent. It's an act of Congress.
Yeah, and then that's part of it.
I'm gonna check out everybody. Thank you for
Bye, John.
having me.
It's good seeing you.
But yes, it's absolutely still an issue. We're absolutely still working with the state, with our businesses. We've got staff people trying to educate everything from our residents to our business owners to our state about how are we trying to resolve this problem now and in the future.
So my recommendation is you use Essex as your mailing address, use your 9 zip code when you can.
The what?
Look at
9 digits.
9 digits.
Oh, the 332.
Zip plus 4.
For you and me.
It depends on where you live.
Yes.
Depends on where you live, the 4 digits, across the street is a different one than mine.
Along that line, a little touch of a segue, but on Susie Wilson Road is, there are a lot of people confused about where the town boundary and village boundary is and so on. And that there ought to be some, and maybe there's some work on this, is to square away signage indicating that you're entering the town. For example, you would need one on the River Road, you don't have one here necessarily now. Coming in from Route 15.
From the village into the town.
From the village into the town, the sign there says Town of Essex and so on. Also on Susie Wilson Road area, similar, that's a little more difficult because the boundary being right there, you cross into the town over by the fort, but still, maybe there's another sign on Susie Wilson Road to say that you are now in the town, or so, I don't know, but anyway, there's an identification crisis a little bit there. Also, as I was looking at to sign up for notifications, you got that nice on the website and so on. And I selected, it said you have to select an address. So I selected my address and it said 9 Maple Drive, Essex Junction, Vermont, which is the old postal issue, okay? So it would be nice to be able to, because every opportunity I get, when I put in an address, I don't put junction anymore, I just put Essex with 99.
And it works sometimes.
Yeah, so that on that website, it looks like it's a national kind of thing, because it lists a whole bunch of addresses in other states or whatever, and that may be, over the top, correct, I don't know, but anyway, it's little things like that that help to try to clarify the identification of where you really are, and so on. So, anyway, that's,
I saw the last communication from the town to the tax department to help get the businesses square, and I noticed it focused on sales tax. I think it's very important to mention the other 2 taxes that are relevant here. Restaurant, somebody got raised, was accidentally charging it, they didn't know, and the bagel place, that's the meal tax. And that wasn't mentioned at all in the communication, it just said sales tax.
you said liquor,
And liquor's the other one, alcohol. And rooms, I'm not sure, yeah, I guess the Essex Resort would be relevant. So there's 4, and yes, important to mention them all. If we do it again. But everybody I've contacted, or everybody I've given to the state, they've been straightened out.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? We've kind of come to the end of our time.
Well, I appreciate this, thank you very much for doing it.
Thank you all for coming.
I got a couple of quickies. Third highway, okay, we can talk about the issue about that forever, and now we kick that in the butt or whatever. But where does the town stand as far as advocating for the continuation of the Surf Highway and or the connector from the Surf Highway over to Route 15 through?
This came up a lot in the town planning sessions, actually.
So is the official town position advocating for, let's get the Surf Highway constructed all the way to the interstate in Williston, and or that connector that goes up through, off of the existing Surf up to Route Sandhill Road and up to Route 15.
Not aware of any active advocacy for that, but a number of years ago, the question came up whether the town went to all of the, not the town, the state went to the municipalities that were impacted by the right of way, and our recommendation was that the state maintain the right of way for the entire length of the circuit. So that has been done, but there's no other advocacy.
If I can put my 2 cents in, I'm a civil engineer, and I did a lot of traffic engineering, and the consensus is that building more highways, it's not going to do any good.
It causes more driving.
Yeah, it generates more traffic than, it doesn't solve the problem, it makes it worse. So, based on what I know, I wouldn't advocate it, but I know a lot of people would like to see
You're
it.
talking about coming from the surfing boat to Alan Martin Market?
That leg there, but also
All the way up to-
continuing all the way across the river to Williston. okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's any appetite at the state level. to do
Yeah,
that.
so, I mean, it was unfortunate that, I mean, the contract was let. And, another little side issue, what's the latest on, making the boundary adjustment down by the river that we talked about?
Haven't really had the opportunity to spend any time on that one.
Okay. No, I just,
It's still on my desk,
yeah,
but
I was trying to Shannon. But anyway, it's not a big deal, but.
Is this in order to have access to those?
Oh, no, that's a long story, we don't have time.
it has
It
to
has to do with where the river flows and where the boundary is.
Oh, I see.
There's some land that appears to be in Essex, but there's really no else than.
Well, the other side, when you come down to 117, there's a little house off to the left, right on the water kind of thing. There's a shack that's there.
Little, yeah.
And there's, part of that is owned by the
Right,
Greenwood Estates. whatever
Francis
that's-
Raymond
yeah.
owns the other piece.
And Francis Raymond owns the other. And Darren's last words to me when he was leaving the committee was that he might just have access to the river by his property, and there's room there for people to park. And we have to contact him. And I've given that information to Al because she wanted to take that up. And if she didn't have the time for it, I was going to do it. Because people want to have access to put their canoes or their kayaks in and everything. And that would be ideal.
The other thing that's going on with regard to that is the Regional Planning Commission is recommending a park and ride at that end of
So, sir,
the CERT that could function as a dual purpose boat
that'd be
launch,
great.
park and
That'd be
ride.
great.
So that's also
I'm all for it.
on
But we need to do it.
the work plan for the Regional Planning.
Very good. And the light on Sand Hill Road onto 15. When is that going to happen? The other day I came and made a turn up, it said 429, and the line is back past the fire station.
I believe that's in, I think, because I look at that once in a while to see where it is in the schedule, and it was